future. I don't know when that future is going to come, but I'm sure it will at one point. Yes, Ramsey Lewis, who now sleeps with the ancestors. I'd just like to call out his name again, Ramsey Lewis.
Oh, happy day.
Ramsey Lewis. Ramsey Lewis. Oh, happy day. Yeah, we had I was a little late joining here. I was gonna have a couple of others, so maybe we'll go out with some Ramsey Lewis, Wade in the Water, of course, the In Crowd, which was recorded live at Bohemian Caverns down on U Street. Well, I can say that it is good to be back with you all. I took a little break, did some traveling to visit with family back in California, and my aunt who got married to her partner. They'd been together for like 30 years and they finally decided to tie the knot, maybe even close to 40 years. So they got married about a month ago in Iowa City, which is where they live. So my sons and I spent some time out there with them, and so we'll be back. The plan is for me to be with you guys every other Wednesday at noon. Those of us who are leading this, we're staying in close coordination to make sure that we're all moving together appropriately and not missing over stuff. Before we begin our lesson, I wanted to, because we're talking about, we're now moving into Kings, right? First and Second Kings, which sort of First Kings begins with the story of Solomon, but it's also just about the various kings, and it's leading up to the Babylonian exile. So when I think about community, think about political space, not only what did it mean for the people of Israel when they were a united kingdom, and then they became two separate kingdoms, the northern and southern kingdoms, but also thinking about what this means for us. And I came across this quote, which I'm just going to drop into the chat. And if I may ask someone to read it for me, I'd appreciate that. You don't want to hear my voice all day, all out. Anybody else want to read it?
Oh, okay. Wait a minute, I don't see it anymore.
It's in the chat.
Oh, no, I turned it off. I'm sorry. There are very few contemporary political spaces where the energies of love and imagination are understood and respected as powerful social forces. And this by Robin D. G. Kelly.
Just take a moment and reread that again on your own, and then either in the chat or just vocally. What does that mean? How is that hitting you? How is it landing with you? What does it make you think about?
Well, first of all, for most politicians, the big worry is just getting reelected.
Yeah.
Of doing justice, this whole business on repaying debts for students who are thousands of dollars into debt, and the blowback on that, I think, giving our kids a chance.
Speak up if you can, Janine.
The teachers, you can't hear me?
You're low. I can hear you, but you're low.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I just said most politicians, their main job is to get reelected, and they base everything on that. Price of gas goes up, and everybody goes into panic. The loan repayments gets a blowback. Why do we want to give rich kids money back when the majority of these kids had no money to start with? And it really hurts teachers. And there's an op-ed about that in the Post. How teachers are, first of all, are underpaid, and they've got debt. And we desperately need teachers, and they have just been so badly taken care of. It just pisses me off. Anyway.
Sister Leandra?
Yeah, I was going to say, unfortunately, love and politics don't go together in America. Those are two things, and I don't think it's too much imagination. Like Janine said, most politicians are worried about being reelected. It's a very self-serving thing, promoting their agendas that will enhance basically their financial well-being. Unfortunately, that's what America is all about. Whenever you get into politics, you're gunning for the next big position. So love. I don't think love is one of the things that's going to come into play. They may say that if it promotes their cause, but I don't think too many people are sincere.
I mean, for obvious reasons, probably, given the fact that we all are living in our nation's capital, when we talk about political spaces, our minds immediately go towards like sort of, the government, politics and government within that sense. But, politics is kind of like the interaction in play. And so, I mean, the church, there's politics within the church, right? Can we agree to that? And there's politics we talked about in schools and in other institutions as well. We, as Christians, people who follow Jesus, we often talk about the love ethic of Jesus, right? But what about imagination? What if we brought like love and imagination, right? Robin D.G. Kelly, and I'll give a little bit of background on him in a moment. But how would our relationship to each other, our relationship not only to politics, but to how we spend our money and how we relate to one another, whether it's at church or it's out in the street, be reoriented if we centered love and imagination?
Well, just having a hope and belief in the future where things can be better. That to me is the thing that is kind of missing. We're just so reactive, and I'm as reactive as anybody, I guess, but I just see we've got to be able to say, yes, we can do better and we will do better. And we work for that.
I mean, because on one level, right, if we're just reacting to something, right, we're still being controlled by that thing that we're reacting to, right? I mean, I know we're all good Christians, and so we don't have any space in our hearts and our minds to hate anybody. But if we were to hate somebody, that doesn't mean we haven't forgotten. They still have a hold on us, right? They're still living rent free in our heads. Right. So if we were sort of imagine something new, it can't be in reaction to capitalism or socialism or fascism or whatever. It's got to be our own authentic thing that we create ourselves. Does that make sense? Am I just, spewing some mumbo jumbo?
No, that makes sense. I think that's why we're so lost today. And that's why our youth are so lost and feeling so hopeless, because we're just spinning our wheels, doing the same old things over and over again. And as they say, that's insanity. If you just keep doing the same thing and getting the same results. And we're going to have to do something creative, because, the world is just going to seems like it's being destroyed environmentally and in many other ways. And that's why our youth, we got to do something to give them hope. And whatever we've been doing hasn't worked. That's why we have all this crime and mental illness with youth. And so somebody's got to use their creative juices, get them going, so to help our world survive, our immediate communities. I don't have the answers.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else have any other thoughts? Any other comments on this subject? I'd like to, I don't know if there's a way to pin this, Evan, to the top of the chat or something like that. Can we pin it? I don't know. But maybe I'll drop it in a little while later towards the end. I'd like us to just meditate on this a little bit. By the way, Robin G. Kelley is a historian at perhaps one of the greatest universities of all time, the University of California at Los Angeles, my alma mater. And he has written a number of very interesting books that sort of deal with what I like to call the radical Black imagination, right? Sort of thinking of, new ways of being and how we can be our true and authentic selves individually and as a community, and sort of move away from the confines of sort of, the status quo of our politics and our economy and cultural identities and whatnot. So he is thank you. So he's Evan just dropped a link to his bio in there. So before we begin, I'd like to, I think it's in line with both our brief conversation about Dr. Kelley's quote, as well as what we're going to be moving into with Kings, a prayer by Wb Du Bois from his book, Prayers for Dark People, Wb Du Bois, which in and of itself is an interesting collection because Wb Du Bois was not known to be a particularly religious man. And this is one of the handful of his collection of spiritually oriented writing. Let us pray. God, give us courtesy. Give us pause in the rush and whirl of life for the little kindness and gentle manners that make the wide difference between life and death in life. May we never forget that true dignity and self-respect do not fear for themselves, but ever prefer the calm quiet of conscious power to the boisterousness of pretension. They do not ask, they do not give. It does not hurt the noble born to bow unbidden, to plead unanswered, or to be silent under scorn. Tonight, tomorrow, and henceforth, we both teacher and taught would be with them that walk in courtesy and the shadow of thy mighty love. Amen. All right. So what is the Book of Kings all about? We have First Kings and Second Kings. Were they meant to be two separate books? No, they were actually written as one solid account, but when they were translated into Greek, they were too long. It was too long to be on a single piece of parchment. So they broke it up into two different chapters, right? So remember, I think one of the last times I was with you all was we had just started Joshua, right? That's when I think the last time I was here, we just finished Deuteronomy. And one of the things that I said about Deuteronomy sets up the next couple of chapters of the Bible, right? Joshua, Judges, Ruth, Samuel, and then the Kings books sort of are the end of what would be called the Deuteronomic history books. Now, given that this is sort of the bookend, if you will, the capstone to the Deuteronomic history, right? We talked about Deuteronomy as being the capstone of the Pentateuch, but also sort of, what's the word that I used? I can't remember what word I used, but the gateway into the next, several books. What can we expect? What do you think that we will encounter as we go through the First and Second Kings with respect to what we know about from Deuteronomy and the previous 4 books that we read?
Good kings, bad kings, people doing right, then people sinning and starting all over again.
Why is that important?
That just, go ahead.
I was going to say, it shows that they found it impossible to follow God's laws, and it's just a vicious cycle with it. Like you say, they on like a yo-yo thing, sin and seeking repentance, and then punishment phase, and ultimately in this story, we're going to go through all of these, like you say, good king, bad kings, and captivity, by the Babylonians, and it's just, it seems like it's a never-ending cycle where they can't get it right, can't stay right for long. They're capable of doing it, though, but it doesn't last long.
I think we can also look towards the creation of a single nation and conflict in the single nation, and then the division into 2 nations, the Northern Kingdom and the Southern Kingdom, and not only fighting the enemy that we fought to steal the land, but to fight among themselves.
Evan, do you mind bringing up chapter 1 of Kings, First Kings?
Give me just 1 second.
Thanks. I thought that, Brother Summers, that last point that you made about not only fighting an external enemy, but fighting internally, right? Because what do we see in Kings chapter 1 and 2? What's going on there? Before, Evan, don't bring it up just yet. Just have to tee it up just yet. But what's going on in at the beginning of Kings?
David is old and is dying.
He's old and he's dying, right? He's on his way out. So what happens when, we just had a transition of a monarch, right? Although there's a protocol that was in place over there. But what happens when you see, and we see this often, in even outside of monarchies, right? But when there's a transition in leadership, right? What tends to start to happen?
Well, it's not always peaceful or automatic.
Right.
Or undisputed, shall we say.
Yeah, sometimes a lot of anxiety. People are fearing the worst from, the newcomer that's in place. And some people are hopeful, thinking that it's going to be positive changes and their savior has arrived, and while others may think the devil has arrived.
Have any of us ever been in positions in either like a workplace setting or in an organization where we assumed that we would be the obvious heir apparent when there was a transition going and it didn't necessarily work itself out that way?
Yes.
Right. Some of us, not me, but some of us might have even gone ahead and picked out new drapes, right, for the office. Started planning the program and everything like that, right? Only to come to find out that it ain't gonna go our way, right? Took a victory lap a little bit too soon.
Well, it's not about one power shift. It's about several within within an organization that determines, whether you become heir apparent or not. And that's why a lot of people are fooled in terms of whether they're next in line of succession or not, because they fail to factor in that fact that there are others who are involved in influencing the decision,
right,
as to who becomes heir apparent next.
right. So we can just take our own denomination, right? Whenever there's a new presiding elder, presumably, not always, but chances are, if there's a new presiding elder, specifically if the presiding elder comes from that district, right? Then, or the new comes from that district, well, that's going to create a vacancy at a church within that district. And then there's probably, to create one presiding elder, you're probably going to create 2 or 3 more vacancies along the line, right? Same thing when we elect a new bishop, right? Bishop gets elevated, then other stuff kind of sort of falls into place. And we've seen other scenarios like that, right? Within the secular world, circular realm. So David's dying. He got a whole bunch of kids. One of them has already slaughtered the fatted calf and everything. He's having a party, right? And I mean, it's not clear, at least in the text here, who David had or what his sons had been promised by David, but we know Bathsheba. And I'm sorry I wasn't here for that conversation on Bathsheba earlier. That would have been a fun one. But Bathsheba obviously was under the impression that her son Solomon was supposed to have the reins passed to him, right? And Adonijah, I think is how you pronounce it. I'll leave it up to our director of Christian education to correct me if I got it wrong. He is assuming that it's going to be him, right? So we have some tensions already here, as Brother Summers had sort of mentioned. Is there another story? Is this the first time where we see brothers conniving or wrangling with each other for leadership, for their father's blessing? Have we seen this before?
Well, we can start off with Cain. Well, not so much Cain and Abel, although there was conflict, but then you get to Esau and Jacob, and then you get to the conflict of Jacob's 12 sons and by 4 different women. and you got the firstborn, which isn't the one he loved, and it is the firstborn from a woman that he didn't really love as much as he loved the other one. And so you've got a lot of conflict in that scenario.
Could I just say, I'm glad we're talking about this, because my sons don't get along. They haven't spoken to each other for quite a while. And it really makes me sad. But I've never looked at it in the context of the Bible and what the brothers did to each other. So at least neither one of them has killed the other. So maybe I should just be grateful. Huh? I just wanted to interject that, because look what happened with Joseph. Yeah. Oh my.
How do we as parents or elders, and you don't necessarily have to be a parent, you could be an aunt or an uncle or a mentor or whatnot. How do we deal with some of these like rivalries that will come up among siblings or cousins or grandchildren, whatever it is? How do we help them sort of like navigate and try to kind of work things out amongst themselves? Or do we just sort of lock them in a room with a couple of boxing gloves and let them figure it out?
Well, if you're a parent, you always say, oh, I love you all the same, or I love one as much as the other, stuff like that, which of course is a lie, because that's just.
I've had to throw up my hands and say, I talked to both of them. And the younger one is particularly angry. He's not well. So that's a worry for me.
Brother Summers?
Yeah, in our Sunday school last Sunday, we talked about the rivalry between Esau and Jacob, and wherein the scripture says that Rebecca loved Jacob, and Isaac loved Esau. And that kind of led to parents creating a division among the children. And in that particular case, it was true, but our conversation also led to most of the men in the class that had children, I think, and TJ can back me up on this, I think we said that the rivalry is the children among children, that one child says, well, Daddy liked you better than he liked me because, and that it wasn't so much that the parents creating the rivalry, it was the children creating the rivalry among themselves. And TJ, did I say that right, TJ?
Yeah, you said it exactly right. And it was all about perception. One kid perceiving that the parent treated them different than the other. And the reality is that we do treat kids different than the other because their needs are different. But that creates that whole perception or misconception that, that one parent favors one kid over the other. Is based on the need.
Yeah, that echoes, and I don't want to speak for you, so Sister Flavia, please feel free to speak up. But she dropped in the chat. I think parents love children differently because they are different human beings, not one more than the other.
Exactly.
And then I just thought of the prodigal son and the older brother. Another completely different situation.
It's been interesting this year. This school year, my sons are going to two different schools for the first time. And they left the school that they were in since, pretty much they were born. And now my oldest goes to a Catholic school downtown, and my youngest goes to our neighborhood public school, Shepherd Park. And so whereas like our morning rituals, we would both be, either my wife and I or one or other of us would be with both kids in the car on the way to school, and we pick them up. Like I'm actually, spending much more time with each kid separately. And, I actually really, I enjoy the time with both of them a lot, but I'm actually really enjoying my time with my youngest son. A lot more because he's older and has, his personality has come out a lot more than, and he was always kind of in the shadow of his brother. And so sort of being able to spend, some time, just the two of us, getting ice cream or, walking and just having those conversations. And I realized they're two totally different people. They are, and I know that there are, my oldest son would want to play video games with me, where my youngest son could care less about playing video games with me. He would rather sit down and watch, a TV show together, or we would cook together, or we would do something like that. So, but yeah, no, they're definitely different human beings. But what does it say, right? Like, and I just want to kind of stick with this sort of family theme, right? Because it's like, if you, right here at the beginning of this, and I think Dr. Bowling put in the chat that her Bible, I guess, calls Kings the rise and fall of the Israelite monarchy, right? So we're talking about, we know there's one kingdom, we know there's going to be a split, right? But if you're if the family in itself, that most basic unit of the society, is at odds and at tension, with each other, what does that portend for, you know, when you move out and beyond that? Am I making sense?
Say it again.
Well, I mean, obviously within the Bible, there's a lot of foreshadowing, right? About things that are going to happen. We already know. I mean, we talked about they can't get it right. I think it was, I don't know if it was Sister Leandra or Brother TJ who said that they can't get it right. They're constantly at odds and they're disobeying God and falling in and out of favor, right? But we're starting here at the very beginning of this kingdom. We have, you know, David, who's this great king, and his sons are at odds with each other over the future of the kingdom. How, I guess the question that I'm trying to articulate is, how can we actually go back to the Robin Kelly quote? How can we embrace and bring love and imagination into political spaces if we don't have love and imagination within our own home?
Well, you're sort of fighting for different things, though.
Speak on it.
In a family, the kids want the parents, you know, to themselves maybe, or they are their favorites among the siblings as well. One sibling loves another sibling better than the third sibling. But among nations, it's usually conflict over resources and territory.
Wasn't mom and dad's time resources? Isn't, you know,
Could be.
I want my own room, or,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, there's just
why does
conflict
he get
among
the
people.
drumstick and I get the breast, or the other way around?
Unfortunately, that carries over, the family issues carry over into once the child enters society. So I bet a lot of people have said that they self-proclaimed black sheeps of the family. And it was like that was the chip on their shoulder, and every situation they got involved in, they were looking to see how they were going to be slighted and treated differently because they felt this was the story of their life from day one when they were a child, and they were never the favored one, and they didn't think the society was going to treat them any differently. And so we do need to fix them up before they enter into the society, because they're so broken, and it ends up being a lot of problems interacting, you know, with other people and being on the job. They think the boss is going to slight them, and they always looking at things with a lens that's colored by, you know, feeling inadequate and feeling that someone else has been favored instead of them. They, you know, so it does start in the home. You know, a lot of people don't get over those issues. That's just deep in their heart, that they're not going to be the golden child, and they're not going to be the successful one out in the world. And then that may not even be true, because very often with many people that I met that said that their families have spent a lot of time trying to encourage them, and they just never felt that anybody cared about them, and if the more the other siblings succeeded, that just reinforced that negative idea in their head that they weren't going to be successful. They didn't. Some couldn't embrace other people's in the family being successful. You know, they just feel that somehow they got left out. People are complicated.
Brother Summers, you look like you were about to say something. No? Okay. Oh, I'm listening. Can we
Yes, the one thing I think I would say is that I can't give up on my kids. You know, I can't just, I really just can't wash my hands of the thing, you know, that I'm part of whatever has happened within the family is much my doing as it is theirs, I think, unless you've got some kid who's really, you know, really homicidal or something, you know, really. But, and even then, you can't give up. And I guess, and sometimes, and I think about Russia and China and us being in competition with these two, and I'm thinking, what a lost cause. China and us are totally intricately involved with with commerce. My God, they need us, we need them, and Russia is, they're so big, but now we've got to get. We're essentially doing a war with Russia through Ukraine. We're spending millions of dollars for that. And, that's okay, I guess, but it's dangerous. It is just very dangerous. And
I mean, I think one of the things that is, and I'd like to turn our attention to chapter 2 of First Kings, because that's where David gives some instructions to Solomon. And I think that we can all think about, recall advice or charge that we were given at one point or another by an ancestor, whether it's a parent or a grandparent or an uncle, likewise, or advice that we've been given. So let's, can somebody read the first pericope up to end of verse 4?
can you hear me?
No,
No.
well, I can hear you now. I didn't hear you reading.
Oh, okay. I'm going to read then.
Okay.
When David's time to die drew near, he charged his son Solomon, saying, I am about to go the way of all the earth. Be strong, be courageous, and keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and keeping his statutes, his commandments, his ordinances, and his testimonies, as is written in the law of Moses, so that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you turn. Then the Lord will establish his word that he spoke concerning you. If your heirs take heed to their way, to walk before me in faithfulness with all their heart and with all their soul, there shall not fail you a successor on the throne of Israel.
All right. Can you take that down? Thank you. Thank you, Janine, for reading that. And thank you, Evan, for showing that to us. Now, I'm going to put this out there and feel free to, I'm going to ask, I guess, like a double barrel, question. One is within the context of Deuteronomy history, right? Why is this charge from David or instruction to from David to Solomon important, right? I mean, it's not the first time we hear David speak in in Kings, but it is it's a significant conversation between the two of them. Why is that important? And just sort of thinking about experiences that we've encountered with ancestors who we either knew were on the verge of passing or we didn't know, but we just look back and realize this was the last time we had an opportunity to sort of talk with each other. So feel free to kind of, respond to either of those, but I'm particularly, since we are, trying to learn about the Bible here, give some thought to why this was important within the context of Deuteronomic history.
Well, it goes to the whole notion of blessings and curses. If you do this, this will happen. If you don't do this, this is going to happen. So he's instructing his son to basically follow the straight and narrow, and if he does that, then all will go well with him, and that it fulfills the promise that the Lord made to him himself, King David.
And also, I think somewhere in Deuteronomy, each generation was told to pass it on to the next generation all the time.
Not just it to be passed on, right? But that the covenant needs to be renewed.
Okay.
By each generation, right? I mean, you know, that's, yes, it's the first generation's job to make sure, but that second generation has to accept it and reaffirm it, right? That it's a two-part kind of exchange. But yes, exactly. Janine, were you about to say something?
And I guess there's the trick is to honor the past, honor that past generation that has done so much, but don't get stuck there. You know, look, we've got to be looking forward to how now, as we reaffirm, how do we then go forward in a very different situation? And I think a lot of us get stuck in the past, you know, oh yeah, you know, oh, these kids today, they're not worth anything. I've heard that. That is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You know, kids, I wouldn't want to be a kid right now, to tell you the truth, in the environment our kids are in. You know, this is horrible, what is going on with our kids. And we need to be supporting them and be optimistic for them. Enough of that.
What can anyone recall any time in their own life, you know, where sticking with this idea of that Brother Summers and I were just sort of, you know, kind of exchanging the idea of passing something on, but then also needing to reaffirm it, right? Like, have we have experiences in our own lives with our own, you know, our own families or, you know, friends where we received a charge, if you will, but we're given the choice of whether to commit ourselves to it or not, right?
Sometimes family members do that in wills. I was thinking of our family house in Charleston, and my aunt, the last family member who lived in it, in her will, she said she hoped that her nieces and nephews would keep the house and come and vacation in it and blah, blah, blah. You know, of course, no one wanted to do that. So that's often the way, you know, your ancestors try to will you to do something that you don't want to do necessarily. And I just recently read an article in a law school journal about the debate between Jefferson and Madison. Jefferson, which I had not known before, said that, or thought that each generation should write the Constitution anew and not to be bound by the past. And Madison thought just the opposite.
Well, it's because Madison was even more of an elitist and aristocrat than Jefferson was, and which is why we have lifetime appointments to the Supreme Court, 6-year terms to the Senate. I'm sorry, I digress. But he was an anti-democratic, anti-democrat. Yeah, right. Is that the right way to say it? He was anti-democracy, is what he was. But yes. Actually, there's I'll try to remember it over the I know I'm not going to remember it while we're here together, but I'll find it. There's a scholar at Harvard who has written about, like, basically the anti-democratic tendencies of the founding fathers, and he really sort of excoriates Madison.
There's a new book out about that, the question of whether we should have new constitutions every so many years. I'll send that to you.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I'd appreciate it. Evan just dropped something which I thought was here, and this actually really appeals to me, not only because I didn't eat lunch, but because I like to cook. But she said, receiving the family recipes and deciding whether to keep them and or to reimagine them. Right? There's no question that I love. There's this casserole that my mom makes, which I love. But my wife actually has learned to do it, and I actually like hers a little bit better. You know, don't tell anybody. Yeah, I don't want my wife or my mom to know that, because that could be all kinds of different problems could come up there. I got a lot of trouble changing the gumbo recipe. Did you add tomatoes or take the tomatoes out, Evan?
We did not have tomatoes in it, but I did make it with tomatoes one time, and my mother said it was sacrilege.
But was it good though? Did she?
Well, so they tend to actually like the gumbo that I make now, which is my own recipe. It's not the family recipe, but I still have the family recipe. So for anything that I've changed or reimagined, I still keep the original recipe card. So I can still make those things, but there are some things that it's like the ingredients have changed, or there's something like local or fresh that I would prefer to put in instead of something else, and it changes the taste of it.
Yeah, it's like you don't put sugar in grits.
And that should never change.
Right.
My cousin Vinny, what's a grit?
I used to make a lemon pie at our holidays, and my mom and I do the graham cracker thing, roll out the graham crackers with butter and whatever. And she made this lemon thing in a double boiler. I love that stuff. I never did find the recipe, and I'm so sad because it was so good. And I don't know what happened to it. And, but I guess I've got a good memory because I love making that. Yeah.
Sister Flavia puts in the chat, she compiled a cookbook for each of her children with family recipes in original handwriting of family members to whom the recipe belonged. That sounds wonderful. A couple of years ago, and actually, this just kind of happened, I think, because I didn't know where we were going to go, but I was moved by the Robin D.G. Kelly quote. But as we're talking about food here, right? Like, and we're talking about, family recipes and sort of taking what our ancestors had made and passed on, but then sort of tweaking them a little bit, right? We're receiving what they've given us in love, but we're using our imagination. Wait, what'd you say, Jioni? No, we're receiving it in love, but using our imagination, right, to expand it and to give it on to another generation, right? And like, that's the base. I mean, that's it right there in some ways, right? I mean, that's what our ancestors did, right? They didn't have all of the regular ingredients that they were used to. There's no agoutis, plants growing out here in the Americas. So they had to find other ways to make it happen. And I was thinking about this. This was the Christmas of 19. I'm like Evan, my family's from the Gulf Coast, although I grew up in California. So, my blood is thick like gumbo because gumbo runs through my veins. And my grandmother, my father's mother's, someone found her recipe for gumbo and passed it around. My grandmother's still alive, but she doesn't cook. And I'm looking at the recipe, and she used like Alaskan king crab in there. Well, there's no way I would ever use Alaskan king crab. That just seems crazy to me. I'm a Dungeness crab man, myself, and I find where I can fly it in. But there were a couple of other tricks that she did, and I was like, that's what I got to do, right? So I took her recipe, tweaked it with a few other things, and like Evan, everyone in the family says that that's the best bowl of gumbo that pot of gumbo that they've had in a really long time, right? But I took the love from my grandmother and reimagine, this sort of thing. And I think that's what we do.
You also have the issue of trying to remember what it tasted like. And even though you have that recipe, trying to get it taste like either what you remembered or how it actually tasted is difficult.
Yeah. I'm eating good tonight, y'all. I don't know about you, but all of this talk's got me. Flavia also says using science and data to make recipes healthy, not artery clogging. Yes, it's always a pinch of something missing until the very end. That was Evan. All right, y'all. Well, I think. Oh, actually, here. Let me see if I can. See if I can drop that in the chat one more time. All right.
Jioni,
yes.
The other thing I was thinking about when he gave this charge, wasn't the example of was it the king by then or the leader who didn't follow God's command about the ritual? Someone was late, and so the king went ahead and performed the ritual, and everyone got all upset. So again, another example of it, if you don't follow to the 10th, to the nth degree, bad things will happen.
Right. Yeah, and there's another one. Hopefully by the next time we're together, I will find it. One of my professors, and I'm actually going to see him next week. There's a version of the Bible. I think it's not the red letter. It's like I think they call it the chain link Bible, where you can kind of like everything that so for instance, when the people of Israel, I'm trying to remember who it is, but they ask God for a king, right? And God says, you don't really want a king, because the king is going to take all your money. He's going to take your young, your children and your sons and send them off to the war. They're going to, exploit your daughters and blah, 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 blah. And then there's, and then it cites later parts of the Bible where in fact those things happen, right? So one of the examples of the king appropriating your property is the story of Ahab, which we're going to get to a little bit later, where he takes the vineyard, right? He's got his palatial estate, but it's not big enough. It's not comfortable enough. He wants the vineyard next to him. And then his wife Jezebel says, well, you're the king. Where I come from, our kings do what they want to do, right? So there is, so there's some other parts. I don't actually have a copy like that of the Bible, but it does exist. But yeah, thank you for that, Sister Bennett. So I just would like us all, just take a look, and maybe I'm gonna, in honor of Ramsey Lewis, take us out with some at least one song of his, maybe two, depending on how long you guys want to stay around. But let's just think about how we can create the energies of love and imagination to the various spaces in which we live, in which we operate, right? I feel love and imagination in this setting here. Can we bring it to our jobs, or when we're and just the simplest ways. So let's just I dropped that in the chat. I think we sort of organically ended up with a conversation about love and imagination and the ancestral link. So I'll let Brother Lewis pray us out.
Could I just add one thing? Judy Fentress-Williams spoke Sunday before last at our church, and she talked about Abraham and dust, and he's going to have as many children as there's dust, and then as many stars in the sky. And what she said was, you are stardust, We are made from dust. And it's the pressure when dust becomes stars, it's because of the pressure that's all around it. But she said, remember that you are stardust. And if we are, then we have a right to be glad for who we are, whatever that means, and to do what God wants us to do, you know, and that we can do things. And that's what I think what I'd like to say now about what we talked about.
Amen. Thank you.
Brother Jioni, before you drop that in, several months ago, I saw Ain't Too Proud to Beg. And another song that you could have played is One of the Temptations. It's just my imagination running away with me, you know, just as an aside.
I like that one. Thank you.
What was the name of the song? I couldn't hear it, Charles.
It was Just My Imagination by the Temptations.